I feel like I learn a lot every time I go fly fishing. So I boiled down all the lessons from 2023 and I came up with 8 big things that I learned this year. From learning a new technique to realizing that I'm a lot more impatient than I actually thought. I learned a ton, and I think some of these lessons will help y'all out and hopefully help you become a better angler. This is Untangled, fly fishing for everyone, presented by Ventures Fly Company. Hey everybody, welcome to it. This is Untangled, and I am your host, Spencer Durrant, coming at you from the land of antelope and sagebrush and nothing. That's exactly how we love it up here in Wyoming. There's a whole lot of nothing, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm traveling for the holidays or going back down to Utah to see family for Christmas, and I'll tell you what, the one thing, like, you don't realize what traffic does to your blood pressure until you live in a state that has no traffic. Literally, there are, I think, 2 traffic lights in the whole county here. Yeah, there's 2 traffic lights in the whole county that here in Wyoming. And so I'm not looking forward to the traffic going on. But anyways, this is not a airing of the grievance. This is not a Festivus podcast, right? This is fly fishing, and we're going to get right into it. And with the new format, we're just going to jump right into the topic that I chose this week. And just a really quick aside, I really do appreciate all the feedback that we got from everybody last week when we debuted the new format. Seems like y'all really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate hearing that from you. It's helpful. It makes me feel like I'm not just talking into the void anymore. So it was really great to hear that, and we're just going to keep trucking along with this. And I'm dedicated to trying to make Untangled the absolute best fly fishing podcast in the industry in 2024. So thank you all for your support and your help. I really do appreciate it. We all do here at VFC. Now, speaking of improving ourselves for 2024, that's not the theme of this episode, but it is in a way kind of related, because I wanted to go back over some of the lessons that I've learned this year, some of the things that when I was out on the water that I realized about myself, or I realized about my fly fishing skills that needed to improve, the things that I needed to do better. And I try my best not to make any bones about, I don't consider myself some kind of expert. I'm very lucky in the fact that I get to fish a lot, and I get to go out and do it a ton, and I live in a place where I can fish year round. So any success I have really just comes from brute repetition, I think, more than anything else. But so I don't want y'all to think I'm sitting here on some high horse of, oh, I learned these things, and in my infinite wisdom, I'm going to dispense them to you peasants. No, that's not what I'm trying to do. These are things I spent a couple hours coming up with these. I found 8 lessons that when I look back on all the fishing we did this year, I think are things that I need to carry with me into 2024 and hopefully build on if I want to be better next year. And I do. I want to catch bigger and better fish next year. I'd really love to crack the 30-inch mark on a trout. I've never caught a 30-inch trout. I've caught 28, a couple 27s, a handful of 26s, and probably about a dozen 25s, but I have not broke that 30-inch mark before. So that's definitely on the list. But anyways, to get there, it's important to look back on what you've done, and hopefully by sharing these things, I can help you realize an area of your angling where you need to improve on as well. So the first one is patience. This is the big thing. This is what I've learned in 2023 is patience. And I want to tell a story about it. Me and Alex, we were here in Wyoming, not too long ago. This is just a story that best illustrates it. But I was nymphing a run, and I didn't get any fish, and I worked through the water pretty quick. I'd nymphed that run actually the night before, and I'd hooked a really big one. It was one of those, hey, dude, fishes. You hook into it, and you yell downstream to your buddy. And I yelled that way to Alex, and Alex I mean, Alex is the best fishing buddy I could ask for because he didn't even blink. He just threw his rod down, grabbed his net, and ran. And by the time he gets up to where I was with the fish, I'm fighting it, and it had gotten to the quick current, and it turned and ran downstream, and I put the wrong kind of pressure on it and snapped the line just like that. So I was impatient with the fight, and then the next day we go back to that run, and I just go through it really, really quick, and I don't really take the time to get it in every little nook and cranny and really put those flies in front of the fish, because once it gets cold, you've really got to kind of hit them on the nose with it sometimes for them to eat it. So I moved on from this run, and Alex moves into it, and he just started getting into fish left and right because he was actually taking the time to do it correctly. He wasn't being impatient, and I missed out on that because I was impatient. And then I actually had to leave the river early that day because on the drive down, my truck had been giving me grief. So the venerable Tacoma bit the dust, actually. I should have led with that on the podcast. The Tacoma bit the dust, so I'm no longer an angler driving a Tacoma. I am an angler driving an F-150, so let the jokes commence. But anyway, I'll talk about that later. But I left the river early because I was worried that my truck was not going to make it home, and it didn't make it home. I got stranded on the way home. So it was a good thing I left early, but I left. Alex caught a couple of fish from that run, and then I got in the truck and was like, all right, I got to leave. And every 10, 15 minutes, I get a phone call from Alex. I got another one. Dude, I just missed this enormous fish. Or, man, this big one broke me off. And it was like that for 2 hours on the drive home. I'm just sitting there and I keep getting phone calls and pictures from Alex of all these big fish. So I was frustrated, and then the truck broke down, and I was even more frustrated. So if I'd just been a little bit more patient, I might have been in on some of that good fishing. So that was the biggest lesson for me when I look back on 2023. And that's just one instance of me needing more patience. There are tons. I could fill this entire podcast up with stories of me being impatient. I'm not going to, but I could. So definitely challenge y'all to be a little bit more patient with it. Anglers are always supposed to be these very patient, sage individuals. And that's not always the case. So anyways, second thing that I learned trout spay this year. For those of you who don't know, spay fishing's with the big two-handed rods where you can really just rocket line out there. And I taught myself to trout spay this year. It has been a ton of fun. I love it. The spay casting is a blast. I'm not good at it, but I'm picking that skill up. It's really tough, and it's a completely different kind of skill set. When I first started, I was like, oh, it's just a giant roll cast, right? No, there's a lot more to it than just a big old roll cast. But I had a lot of fun with it. It's giving me the ability to cover really big water in a way that previously I only could from the drift boat. So I really appreciate that part of it. It's fun. I like learning new things. I learned Euro nymphing when that was first bursting onto the scene. I tried Tenkara, and I could take or leave Tenkara. Euro nymphing's useful. It's not my favorite, but this trout spay thing, I'm like, oh snap! I've found something here that I really, really love. It's just a really unique way to chase trout. So I had a lot of fun learning that this year, and I think if you're in a place where it makes sense to learn it, I would highly recommend it. If you've got bigger water around you where you can throw those big spay casts, do it. You're not going to regret it. All right, third thing I learned, the value of fishing and learning how to fish high water. We had a crazy runoff here in Wyoming. It was stupid cold for 5 months until May, and then it warmed up for about 2 days, and then it rained all of June. I haven't lived in this part of Wyoming for too long, but one of my neighbors, he grew up here, and he just turned 72 this year, so he's seen a few summers here, and he'd never seen a June like we had, where it just dumped rain almost every single day. So the rivers were crazy, crazy high. And I was either going to sit at home and not fish and be angry that I wasn't fishing, or I was going to learn how to fish high water. So I spent a lot of time on YouTube. I spent a lot of time reading. And it's not that I didn't know how to fish high water. I think it was a confidence thing more than anything else, where I just hadn't done it enough that I felt like I could go out and actually catch some fish. And that's something that holds me back sometimes. I will talk myself out of going to a place if I don't think I can catch fish. And I don't know why I do that. I think it's a pride thing. I don't want to admit that I can't catch fish sometimes. It's a really stupid thing to deal with, but I get in my own head that way sometimes. And I would talk myself out of going to fish the high water. So I'm glad that I was forced to this year, because I ended up having a really great day. In fact, there's this little stream by my place here, and the stoneflies were out, and the water was just raging, but there were big stoneflies. It was salmon flies, actually, that were out. So I tied on a salmon fly nymph, and I looked for the slack water wherever I could find it. And sure enough, if I drifted those salmon fly nymphs in the slack water, I was into fish. I had some of my best days fishing those big salmon fly nymphs in the slack water, even with the river just raging and looking like chocolate milk. I was able to do that. So it was a lot of fun to get into that, and I'm glad I did. Oh, I think this is number fourth thing I learned. You got to clean your waders. And I'm really embarrassed to admit this, but even after all my years of reviewing waders, I haven't reviewed as many waders as I have fly rods, but I've reviewed my fair share of them. I didn't know that you needed to clean them. Now, obviously, the inside, I knew that because they stink. But the outside, like the face fabric itself, if you get dirt in it or whatever, you actually need to clean them, because they won't perform the way they're meant to if you don't clean them. And not just clean them, but revive them with some waterproofing treatments as well. Not waterproofing, water repellency treatments. I can't recommend it enough. In fact, and I just got done talking with some experts about waders for an upcoming episode 57. You are not going to want to miss that one. You're going to learn more than you ever thought you could about waders. But that was one of their big takeaways, was you definitely need to clean those waders, because they're going to perform at peak performance if you clean them. And I'd highly recommend reading a story from Dom Swintoski over at Trout Bitten that he wrote about cleaning waders. I've linked it in the podcast description. 100% you should check that one out. All right, I think this is thing number 6, lesson number 6 that I learned. The value of exploring new water. And I know that seems like a silly thing to learn, right? You know, I live in Wyoming, a place that practically begs you to explore it. But I spent a lot of time this year not catching fish because I was exploring new water. In fact, there was one night, this might have been what did the Tacoma in, why it died on me. I took it up this awful road because there were these lakes that I wanted to get to. And I was looking at the map, and I'm new here, so I don't know the right way to go in. And I was like, oh, I can go in the back way, and it's going to be so much quicker. Well, the road, if you could call it that, was really just a bunch of boulders in between the trees, and I bounced. I think I slipped a disc in my back from bouncing on that road. It was off. It was one of the worst roads I've ever been on. And I've been on some bad roads. This thing was terrible. And I got up there and I had the place all to myself. And the irony is that road dumped me right into this campsite, a Forest Service campsite. And there was a beautiful dirt road that led right into the campsite that I should have taken, that I didn't, because I'm an idiot. But I got up there and I couldn't take that nice road down anyways because it was gated. So the back way was the only way to get in. And I had the lake to myself because the main road in was gated and nobody else was dumb enough to come up it. And the fish were rising in this lake and I was like, oh, sweet. So I set about trying to catch them. And I didn't catch very many, but I saw just a lot of a really, really cool stuff that I didn't think I'd ever see. And I got to see a lot of really cool foxes that night, got to see a bunch of elk. It was a lot of fun. And that happened more and more this year, where I just pushed myself to go out and try and find new places. And then maybe the fishing wasn't great, but I saw amazing things. So that was the value in exploring new water for me. And this next one, tip number 7 or 6, I got off. I think I skipped number 5. This goes right along with exploring new water, but don't get stuck in a rut. The local creek that I've got here, I finally went and explored new sections of it because, I kind of get into the routine. I go up there, I fish the same little bit, and I come home and I get back to work. Well, I finally went up above this waterfall that I'd never fished above before, and I get up there and there's just this beautiful pool. And I'm looking at it. I'm like, oh, there's a fish in there. And I could see a fish sitting at the tail of this pool. And I was like, ooh, that's a good fish. But the only way to get him, I had to crouch behind this rock and dangle my rod over it. It was the only way to get a drift into this pool. It was such tight quarters. And so I do that and I hook into it. And the fish ate the fly on the first drift. It was wonderful. But it was like a trout rodeo after that because this thing jumps and it runs up and then it goes down and it tries to go down the waterfall. And I don't want to go down the waterfall with it because it's like a 10-foot waterfall. It's not huge, but I don't want to go down a waterfall. So I'm trying to wrangle the trout and it's doing its best to, buck me off. And it was nuts. I finally got the fish in and let it go. And it was like that the whole rest of the way up this new stretch of water where I just kept finding nice fish in really cool pockets. So it was so much fun to go up there and do that. I kicked myself out of the rut, and I even found some of the cutthroat that are in this stream. I never caught them before, but there are some in there. So all in all, I kicked myself out of a rut and I found some new stuff. It was a lot of fun. All right, tip number 7, or thing number 7 that I learned. I still love dry fly fishing more than anything else. Oh my goodness, I love dry flies. We had some great dry fly days together as the VFC crew. Me and Alex and Berkeley were out in Oregon, and we got into some dry fly fishing that just it was like the water was boiling. We almost, all three of us, we just stopped. I remember there were so many fish rising in this stretch of the river, and we just stopped and we looked at the fish, and then we looked at each other and we're like, is this real? Are we actually experiencing this right now? And we were, thank goodness, because it was just one of the most fascinating things to see, to watch that many fish come up for those bugs. And, I had great hatches here in Wyoming as well. I can't overstate how much fun it is just to watch fish sip dry flies. I love it. It is my favorite thing. And the last thing that I learned in 2023, I still have a ton to learn. And that's not a cop-out. It is true. Because every time I go out there, I'm like, oh, I think I know what I'm doing. And then some days I go out there and I get my butt kicked. Like when I was learning Trout Spay, I think I spent probably a week fishing, didn't catch anything. And then I finally caught my first one on a spay rod. And that felt, you want to talk about satisfying. That was satisfying because I'd put in the work for it. And I got my butt kicked. But I know that, I spook fish too often because I get impatient. I walk through the rivers too much, and I'm not as stealthy as I should be. I spook big fish. In fact, the local creek here where I'm at, I was fishing it, and there's these big pools down at the very bottom of the creek. And I was fishing the top pool, so right at the top of the chain of pools. There's like 3 or 4 of them right in a row. So I was on the top one, and I saw this little fish down on the tail, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go ahead and catch the little fish. So I did, and put him back in, and I'm looking. I don't see any more fish. I don't see anything rising, and I decide to just go up and skip the rest of the pool. I'm just going to walk right through it and go to the riffles above it and see if there's fish there. And as I stepped into that pool, out of the corner of my eye, I see this enormous tail. and I looked down in enough time to see the biggest brown trout that I've ever seen on this little stream. He looked up at me, and I swear he grinned at me like, "Not today, buddy." And then he flicked his tail, and his tail fin was as big as my hand. It was huge. And he shot back into the deepest part of the pool. And I just sat there kicking myself. Like, I cannot believe I just did this again, because that was like the 4th or 5th day in a row that I'd gone and spooked a big fish out of wherever I was fishing. So I've got a lot to learn that way. And I'm not as good on big water as I'd like to be. There's a lot of places for me to improve. Certainly my nymphing needs to improve. I got to spend more time with Alex on that. And but anyways, those are my 8 things that I learned in 2023. And I'd love to hear what y'all learned in 2023. So leave us some comments somewhere. Send us some smoke signals. We're carrier pigeons can still find my house. So can the Pony Express. You can send them on up here. I'd be more than happy to hear from you guys and hear what y'all have to say, and hopefully help each other out as well. So those are the lessons. Let's hear what y'all had to say. And now we are going to jump into the question portion of this week's show. All right, we got quite a few awesome questions this week. We're going to be talking about advice for buying new fly rods, my favorite basic dry fly patterns, and some tips on fishing a dry dropper rig. So we've got some really great questions. First one, Gary from Nebraska is going to start us off, and he says, I started fly fishing in April. Yes, you can fly fish in Nebraska. I fish for large and smallmouth bass and panfish in local ponds and lakes. I'm definitely hooked. Yes, another bad dad joke. I started with the 9-foot 5-weight Encounter fly rod combo from Orvis and love it. I added a 9-foot 8-weight fly rod combo from TFO for windy days on lakes, which occurs frequently in Nebraska. I like to fish streamers and poppers mostly. I go a few times a week, mostly dawn or dusk. My question is, how much runtime should I have before thinking about another fly rod, and what size from my home waters? Love the show with all the questions and story time. I really appreciate how VFC so actively supports the fly fishing community. I regret not getting into this sooner. Thanks, Gary. By the way, Coke Zero is better. Gary, I'll forgive you for being mistaken about Coke Zero, because I can recognize another diehard fly rod guy. So I think we're probably having a similar thought process here. But to your Coke Zero things, Alex and I were having a conversation earlier today, and he said, and I quote, "Let the record show that I was feeling crazy today and tried Pepsi Zero. It was not good." In fact, he says, quote, "clearly inferior to Coke Zero." So Pepsi Zero is still at the bottom of the rung, just in case anybody was wondering, because our opinion here at Untangled matters immensely to the soft drink world. In fact, I am certain that when Coca-Cola decides to sponsor this show, we are going to affect stock prices. So, granted, I should probably now add a disclaimer to not buy stock based on what I say. But if you need a disclaimer to not buy stock on what I say, then, you shouldn't be buying stock anyways. Oh, all right, Gary, I'm going to get to your question. So the answer to your question really depends on how quickly you improve as an angler. When you start to appreciate what different and more expensive fly rods can do is once you're aware enough of your casting abilities to tell if your gear is limiting your performance in any way. So let me give you an example. The fly flinger that we have here at VFC, it is one of my favorite fly rods. I'm not just saying that because it's the VFC product. It is really good. It's light, it's effective, and it's versatile. For the price, I find that it's very hard to beat for what it does. It's just an enjoyable rod to fish. But with that said, I do notice its limitations because it has them. Every fly rod will. Especially if I want to throw big bugs like streamers. It's not as great at that as my 6-weight would be. Any 9-foot 5-weight should be able to handle smaller streamers, but like any 9-foot 5-weight, the fly flinger struggles with the bigger stuff. That's just not what it was designed to do. So in that case, it makes sense to grab another rod that can handle those streamers more effectively. And when I talk about big streamers, I'm talking about like triple articulated stuff that's just honestly stupid. 90% of the streamers that you will throw for trout and a few streamers you throw for bass will be fine on the fly flinger. So if you find yourself in that sort of situation where you notice that the rod's just not doing what you need it to do, buy yourself another rod. In fact, buy yourself another rod if it's a day that ends in a Y. Buy another rod when you're sad because fly rods make you happy. All right, kidding aside, you can buy whatever you want, whenever you want, but I think you will buy the rod that's best for your situation once you have a better idea of exactly what it is that you need. So make sure that you are advanced enough in your fly fishing that you can tell, okay, the 6-weight's not letting me do this, so I need a 5-weight. Or the 8-weight's not letting me do this, I need a 7-weight. All right, once you're able to know what those things are and you're able to recognize it, and those are going to be different for everybody, that's when it makes sense to me to move on and pick yourself up a different rod. Another example I can give you is I've got a stable of fly rods for my dry fly fishing because each one of those rods does something extremely, extremely well. As for you, though, if I had to suggest just one for you to pick up, I would go with a 6-weight. I think that's going to cover a variety of situations it sounds like that you face all the time. Plus, it's versatile enough to handle trout if you ever run into any of those critters. So, thank you, Gary, for that question. Really appreciate it. Our next question comes to us. Patrick from Colorado writes in, says, during an episode during the summer months, you mentioned some classic nymphs for fishing trout in the western states, including zebra midges, Frenchies, and hare's ears. I love the simplicity of using only a few patterns and focus more on size and shape versus exact hatch matching. I was wondering if you have some go-to dry fly patterns that would pair up with these nymphs. I love what you guys are doing with the podcast and tight lines. Hey, Patrick, great question. Thank you a bunch. It's really interesting that you ask this question because I literally, the other day, I was probably supposed to be doing something productive, but I made my winter fly tying list of all the patterns that I need to tie because I'm out of everything. Also, an aside, like, where the heck do flies go? Because I lost so many this year, and I do not remember breaking that many flies off. So I think there's some, like, big fly conspiracy afoot. I think we might have to have a special, an Untangled special to uncover the conspiracy that's eating your flies. We might have to do something like that. Anyways, the dry flies that I put on my list, things I need to tie this winter so that I'm ready to go once the spring hatches and everything else kicks into gear. Parachute Adams, Parachute Blue Winged Olive, Parachute Midge, Pale Morning Duns, Elk Hair Caddis, Elk Hair Stimulator, and a Chubby Chernobyl. So that's really it. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 8. Eight different dry fly patterns. I keep things pretty simple. I have a ton of emergers. I have I have like 16 different emerger patterns that I like to. I don't know why I tie so many emerger patterns because I always end up going back to the sparkle dun, which again, I'm going to do an episode that is just an ode to the sparkle dun. I'm going to write a poem all about it because I love sparkle duns. But anyways, if we're just talking strictly dry flies and not emergers or cripples, these are the dries that I use most often. Obviously, I'm using them in different sizes and different colors, but I try to keep my dry fly selection pretty small. I've got a ton of emergers, like I said, because those are so effective during hatches, especially mayfly hatches, that I fish more emergers during those hatches than I do the duns anyways. Same with cripples. They're so good in those hatches. Anyways, I'll kind of go through them a little bit, give you some background info on them. The Adams it's a really good do-it-all imitation, but it's really effective for mayflies. The Blue Wing and PMD are two different types of mayflies. The Parachute Midge will work really well for midges, obviously, and sometimes it will work for tricos. It depends on how picky the fish are that are eating those tricos. Tricos are just a really tiny mayfly, for those who don't know. The elk or caddis is great for your caddis flies. The stimulator is a good stonefly imitation, and the chubby is going to be your hopper. So that's what all those are going to represent. Now, if you're asking specific pairings, like, do I always fish a Frenchie with my elk or caddis, for example, that is going to depend entirely on your local fishery. I switch up my pairings based on what I find in the water. My local creek, for example, has a ton of stoneflies in it, so I'm almost always fishing a Pat's rubber leg on my dry dropper rig. But then later in the year, there's a really nice blue wing hatch, so I will switch to some hare's ears or even perdigones to try and focus on what's available in the water, what the fish are likely going to be keyed in on. So that's definitely the approach that I recommend you take on your waters. And if you're not sure what bugs are available, then I would suggest, start by looking under the rocks or in the water first to see what bugs are out there and try and match those to what you have in your box. We've also got an in-depth ebook that is for free. It's available for free. It's all about picking the right fly. I'm going to link that in the podcast description for you as well. But I really appreciate that question, Patrick. Thanks a bunch for sending that one on in. Just like that, folks, we are at the last question of the show this week. Justin from Illinois is going to help us out. And Justin says, hello, Spencer. Thanks for all the great information from you all at VFC. I've binged your podcast for the last few weeks on my way to and from work. Between you guys and Dom at Trout Bitten, I had something so much better to listen to than the news. I have a question regarding nymphing and hook setting. I've listened enough to know that periodically hitting bottom is the best place to be when nymphing. My question is, when fishing a dry dropper, are you guys just setting the hook every time you see your dry bob, whether it's a fish or just hitting the bottom? Also, is there a difference in the way the dry moves between a fish strike and hitting the bottom? Thanks for taking the time to read my question. Can't say that I ever go for Diet Coke or Coke Zero. I don't drink a lot of soda, but when I want a cool belly washer, I'm a bit addicted to Strawberry Crush at the moment. Justin, great question. I appreciate it, and I honestly think I've had a crush like 3 or 4 times in my life. I know, but it really wasn't a big soda growing up in Utah. It wasn't a big thing. We were all about Mountain Dew back then, and I think they still are down in Utah. Just a thing. So, anyways, your question. Let's get away from the soda talk. The question you ask can really be best answered through experience, and I know that's probably not the answer that you wanted to hear, but I spent a lot of time thinking about this and how I wanted to answer it. And it's hard for me to articulate how I tell the difference between what's a take and what's just hitting the bottom or snagging up on something when I'm fishing with a dry dropper rig. I'm going to give it a shot, but hopefully it makes sense. And if it doesn't, please reach back out, and I'm more than happy to try and explain it again. And that goes for anybody, right? If there's a question that you want more info on, please do not hesitate to reach back out. But here's my attempt at articulating this, all right? Generally speaking, when a fish eats your dropper on a dry dropper rig, the fly is going to drop under the water pretty suddenly. It's not a gradual drop usually. So if you see your dry gradually go under, it's probably not a fish. That is one of the advantages of a dry dropper. It's sensitive. It's more sensitive than an indicator. So you see a lot of takes, and they're usually going to be really obvious. If the dry slowly goes under, or it looks like it's just trying to float, but it isn't, that's usually a sign that you need more floatant or that it's hung up on something. Now, the takes on a dry dropper rig can sometimes be so subtle you will never see them. I used to argue with my buddy Ryan Kelly. He's a guide down on the Green River in Utah. We'd fish together, and he'd tell me, "Oh, your dry moved, hit it." And I'd be like, "No, it didn't." But it did, and Ryan could see it, and I just would ignore those little ones. So that's something that he knows, though, from, I'm not trying to age Ryan. I think he's been guiding for more than 20 years. So, he's going to know those kinds of things because he's been out there and he's been doing it. He knows what it looks like. So with that said, though, I was just out fishing over the weekend with a dry dropper, actually, and I set the hook when the dry dipped immediately and it was stuck on a rock. So it's going to happen from time to time where it's not always going. There's no way to know for sure, 100% certain all the time. So if that's what you're expecting, you got to adjust your expectations because that's not possible in fly fishing. All right. Generally speaking, unless I just know it's not a fish, I will set on everything. And I think a lot of anglers develop that sixth sense where we really can tell a take apart from snagging on a rock or hanging up on something else. It's something that will come with time on the water. And when you see something play out time after time after time, you develop a knack for identifying what that take looks like versus what's just your dropper hanging up on the bottom, like that example I gave with my buddy Ryan. So, short answer to your question, set on everything, and eventually you're going to learn what to set on and what not to. Now, I love those questions this week. Those were great. Thank you to everybody who took the time to send those on in. And if you have a question that you'd like answered on the show, please do not hesitate. Drop a line to us. There's always a link in the podcast description as well to where you can submit a question. We love getting these questions from y'all, and that's what keeps the lights on here at Untangled. And I really hope that if you're not out fishing, because it's probably too cold at this point, that y'all have happy holidays. And until next week, tie lines, everybody.